start. We are born again. Open your heart. Spend this time in your head.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I want to introduce you to a lady that I met through Emily Penton on Instagram. Her name is Becky Niles, and it's I am Becky Niles on Instagram, right?
Yes, it is, Amy.
Okay. Well, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. So, do me a favor, just tell me, start at the beginning. Just start at the beginning and go from there.
Just start at the beginning. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And so what really ended up and started my journey was just like anyone else. We're going to take several years and I'm going to try to end up and compile it down into a brief overview. It started when I ended up and was a first-time mom. So normal standard American diet, eating for two mentality. I was young. It was my first kid, growing this tiny human, and I didn't know any better back then. And that was 20 years ago also. So, it was very standard American diet, not as much information is out as what is now in the low carb keto and carnivore communities. But so ultimately it started then, and then I really ended up yo-yoing for the next few years, had a couple more kids, never really got back down to, pre-pregnancy weight. I always just kind of really carried the weight with me. And so, fast forward through all those years, I started in 2006 with Weight Watchers. We had a local group here, and I actually was working for them at the time. I made lifetime member. I lost the weight because I was eating 1 point vegetables and chicken breasts and all this lean stuff because I could fill myself up by bulk, the low carb, the lettuce, the cucumbers, all of that type of food. And so I did that for a couple years. We ended up, unfortunately, we're a small town. We lost that. So then I did the whole mentality, calorie in, calorie out, just end up and move more, exercise more. Doesn't matter what you're putting in, just burn it off type. So like I said, fast forward again, a few more years, started using MyFitnessPal, really becoming a data nerd, I guess, is what I am now known as also in some places, because they don't like tracking, they don't like measuring, they don't like weighing, and so that started 2014, 15, and then I ended up and also found keto at that point about 2016, and I did that really great, had amazing success on low carb and keto. But that's also when the processed keto foods come out. Let's slap a label on it and call it keto. Again, there wasn't the information out in 2016, 17 that there is now. And I didn't know what I know now either. And so I ended up, starting to down the road of processed keto foods. If it had keto, it ended up and worked, it must have been keto. Yeah, so that was the slippery slope with the processed foods keto, not the whole food keto. The whole food keto worked, but the Quest bars, and I hate to call companies out here, but the Quest bars, the chips, the smart cakes, the breads, the pastas, etc. Those type of foods that ended up, not having the ideal ingredients, or actually they even had an ingredient list to them, not just a food. And so that's when in November, like I said, we're kind of fast forwarding and summarizing. I had several chronic issues started to backtrack a few steps to get the full story here. I had a few conditions that were starting after my last child. A couple years later, I had a hysterectomy, and that would have been 2010. I started to get cardiac issues. I had hormonal issues. Like I said, had a hysterectomy. I wasn't even 30 years old yet when I had a complete hysterectomy with a double oophorectomy. So I have no ovaries, completely. Ended up getting cardiac issues, had asthma issues, was seeing a cardiologist, pulmonologist, was told I had asthma. it all started to kind of, go downhill. My A1C started to tank. A lot of what we now know as, metabolic issues, when we thought it was just genetic. So my dad was diabetic and I'm like, oh, it's just genetic. I'm just going to end up and have diabetes too. Not realizing that, like I said, back then, that it was an actual metabolic issue and I could change the food that I was eating and I didn't have to be a type 2 diabetic. And I didn't have to be, on cardiac medication and on inhalers. And so then I also, as we're going through this, I ended up with thyroid issues. My mom has issues. There's genetic issues. But it turned into Hashimoto's. So I was very hypothyroid and I was on medication. Again, between hormonal and thyroid and adrenals, it led to another round of weight issues, emotional issues, depression, all of those, related type issues. Okay, back to 2019, November 2019, I stumbled upon carnivore because I was only doing a handful of vegetables towards the end of, the keto, and still the processed foods, the fat bombs, the artificial sweeteners, a lot of that type of stuff. But I stumbled upon carnivore and Sean Baker. And I'm like, I'm from Nebraska. I can end up and just start eating meat. He's doing it. Several other are doing it. At that time, it was meatheals.com. Several other people are seeing success. I can do this. And we get a beef processed every year. And I started weaning out, through the holidays, still kept some of the fat bombs and, the treats through the holidays. But World Carnivore Month hit in January, went full on in January with Sean. And my goal at that point was only to do it for 30 days. I'm like, I can do it for the month and that's it. But I started to see non-scale victories in my health conditions. But also when I started, there were a few things that were out of whack. So like I said before, I was the data nerd. I was tracking things. That included my blood glucose. My glucose started to go up. Got my first CGM because I'm like, why is my glucose going from what is normally, 70s, 80s considered normal, and I'm producing ketones, to not having ketones, to not having stable glucose? I mean, we're talking 188, 200 consistently, when I knew if I did whole foods keto, I could be down in that 70s and 80s. So I was seeing that difference. Processed keto, maybe I just have to, get fat adapted. Maybe I'm not fat adapted with the processed foods. And so like I said, at that time I worked with NutriSense, got my Freestyle Libre, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Why is this? I'm never going to end up and reverse that diabetes. Maybe it is just genetic. Changed it back to my ketogenic macros, the high fat, moderate protein, and it started to stabilize. And that A1C that was 5.8, 6.0, depending which lab, because I went to a health fair and one said 5.8 and my physician ended up and said 6.0. So either way you look at it, borderline. And so then anyway, I pulled back down to those macro ratios and things started to stabilize. And I'm like, I'm sleeping better. My A1C is starting to get better. I started working with Let's Get Checked to do my own lab work, because I'm like, maybe there's something to this. So I'm just going to end up and continue. And I felt better. I had energy and I continued it. And I stayed that way for 2.5 years before I reintroduced any other food. So fast forward to now, I have started to reintroduce certain foods, but I'm still doing the high fat, and people thought I was nuts 3 years ago when I did it, but.
And now you're not so nuts.
Now I'm not so nuts. Everyone else is doing it too.
Don't you love it? It all came back around. It just took a little while for us to get here. I'm not nearly as long of a story, track record. I mean, I just started on my journey 2019, really, or 2018, end of 2018, beginning of 2019. Man, do I wish I would have found it sooner. That's for sure. But I think that's always the case for all of us. We always wish that we would have started sooner. So I find it funny that it led you back to the beginning, back to the basics of what actually worked. So what you said that you've started incorporating more food again. Do you want to share what you have been incorporating?
Yes, so I ended up, and primarily I do more of an, I would call it an ancestral approach. So if it's locally, it's in season and or fermented. So I've done things like sauerkraut, kimchi, um, pickles, those type of fermented foods. I have started putting in a few plant fats also. So like avocado oil, olive oil, MCT oil on occasion. I have done avocado, even though it's not locally. That is one thing that I will say, isn't local to me. But I really took it very slow and very strategic. And that's one of the things. So all of my conditions, I'm not on any medication. I'm not dealing with conditions. I stay complete high fat carnivore before I introduced anything. So I did do the complete elimination before, starting to reintroduce. When I started to reintroduce, I simply did the plant fats first. So I ended up, making sure that my body was going to tolerate plant fat or plant oil, not plant fat, plant oil, in addition to carnivore. And so that's how I ended up and started. I, follow several people that do keto in regards to epilepsy, which is one of the books that is sitting behind me. I really got into looking at it from a therapeutic standpoint. So everything that I've kind of been adding, I've tried to have a purpose to it. And that was one of the things in the ketogenic space, they do the plant oils, primarily MCT, to, help boost those ketones for epilepsy, etc. So that was what I started. And then I went with the foods that corresponded with that. So that's where the avocado come into play. Plus, it does have those healthy fats. And then I did a little bit of coconut, not very much of the unsweetened, regular like coconut flakes, but I do a lot of olives, or sometimes do a lot of olives. So I kind of now am more cyclic. But then when we come around to summertime, when, like I said, when things would be in season, I mean, you're not going to end up and see me, eating a mango or a papaya or a kiwi or, something like that, because I just want to have it in the middle of Nebraska, So that's kind of how I've taken the reintroduction part of it, is one food at a time. Make sure, how is my energy? How is my sleeping? How is my digestive issue, system? Does it cause me a rash or aches, pains? Do I get blurry vision? Any of the symptoms. If I get anything, I can immediately correspond it to food.
That is brilliant. I love, and that's so part of your data nerdness.
It is.
Taking the scientific approach to doing this. I'm terrible at reintroduction. I'm like, oh, I kind of want to reintroduce this one thing. And then in the same day, I'll reintroduce 4 other things too, because I'm already doing something and I know better. Every single time I know better, and yet I still do it. So have you found any foods that you aren't able to tolerate?
I've been pretty picky. I do keep like nuts out, except for peeling nuts, because if I end up getting into nuts too much, I mean, it's one of those that can be a slippery slope. And I also try to like limit the oxalate foods. So, almonds are high in oxalate anyway. But those are one things that can be overdone. is nuts, for instance. Um, Nightshades. So if I get into too many tomatoes, that'll end up and be an issue. I can have it in moderation, and I've gotten better with that. That's the other thing with doing this is the connection to food. I look at it more as nutrition and medicinal or therapeutic versus an emotional comfort, trying to just eat to eat. I end up and look at food as, okay, what does my body want or need versus what is going to end up and make me feel happy, or what is going to, suppress the stress, or what is going to, it's breaking that emotional tie to, or memory even, because typically, say a piece of cake or a piece of chocolate or whatever, it's an emotion that is tied to that. And once I broke that, I can still remember the memory, that I have with my grandma or something, food related, but tying it to something else has really made that disconnect. Because every time you're at a family gathering, you don't want to just have grandma's apple pie just, because. So spending other things that are not revolved around food with grandma or with family is really what has separated me and what I've been able to reintroduce, because I don't have that slippery slope or that fight of the willpower to not have it. Or like you said, well, I've already ended up and had one, I might as well have everything else, So it's really ended up and helped, but I also have strategically done it. So I also work with Keto Academy, and one of the things that Ben talks about is if you're going to flex out of ketosis, to do it 1 day a week. So, if I want a food that is going to end up and kick me out of ketosis, which to create metabolic flexibility, that can end up and be beneficial. So, doing that 1 day a week or 1 day a month, or, whatever you're comfortable with, putting that in there, if it isn't a slippery slope and it can stay in that 1 day, then that's another way to do it too, instead of, oh, maybe I'll have almonds today, or maybe I'll have, a salad, or maybe I just end up and use that type of a method to put those foods in there.
That is awesome. I actually really like that. And I found recently with my own experimentations that my numbers were good. They were fine. But whenever I tried to cauliflower mac and cheese. Brought that in. I'm not sure if that's what gave me a reaction or if it was something else because again, 4 things in 1 day. And of course, the cauliflower mac and cheese itself has several ingredients in it, most of which I already eat right now anyways. But I was expecting terrible numbers the next morning. I mean, I didn't eat a ton of it, but I almost never eat plants. Woke up in the morning and my blood sugar was 10 points lower than it normally is. And my ketones were about where they normally are, up in the 2s, 2.5s. And I was like, you know what? I think that really does speak to the metabolic flexibility, because I was just sticking with the beef and egg yolks. And that's pretty much all I was doing. And then my coffee, which has butter, coconut oil, and an egg in it. But then when I did that, I really changed things up, and my body really responded well and rewarded me with good numbers. So I'm thinking that for some people, it's actually not a terrible thing to not have this rigid structure that we don't ever deviate from. So I love the 1 day a week.
Well, and the possibility for that, and I say possibility because of course it's very individualized and everyone is different, but many of us also are not looking beyond just nutrition. So if you were stressed, if you were, I know you're a mom, you're busy, you're active. And for many of us, that ends up having just that little bit of carb in there, like you said, in the cauliflower mac and cheese and maybe a few other things. that calmed the cortisol too, because it was like a burst of quick energy, because carbs break down a lot faster. So it was that quick burst of energy that calmed the cortisol, because it provided that sugar, that glucose. And so it calmed that cortisol, which then, when you calm the cortisol, the glucose drops also. So that could have ended up and been what it was. I know I've seen that, especially in my, like you said, the morning numbers, or in a stressful situation. If I just end up and have a little bit of, carbs, or if I'm doing carnivore too much, or certain, other areas that I try to focus on and be very consistent with, I call my non-negotiables. But if they happen to, fluctuate, or say maybe I haven't got out and done my grounding or my sunlight routine, or, at these other areas that I end up and I focus on too, as much as I typically would, or I have screaming kids, through the day, my body just needs that little bit to calm that response. And it is overall created better numbers.
That is so amazing. I love that you brought up the other stuff. Sometimes we get so obsessed with the food, and we think it's the food. And if we have the perfect macros, we will have the perfect results. And that just isn't always, and doesn't seem to usually be the case. I think that there's some people that absolutely can just get the food right and get amazing results. But I think that there's actually a lot more of us who have to add in the other stuff, the grounding and all of those, before we begin to see our true healing. I think it helps our relationship, like you said, with the food, so that we aren't so obsessed about it, and it becomes our new, it is really truly an obsession, and almost an eating disorder on some levels. It's like, this is the new eating disorder. And it's really hard to watch sometimes.
Well, and I always refer to a good friend of mine that was very strict. I mean, they ended up, eating pretty much the same thing. I mean, we're talking days on end, like 1,000+ days. And they seen great benefits. They seen great mental health benefits. But when I started to speak about grounding and, sunlight routine, getting outside, they ended up and noticed a further reduction in inflammation. Now, they were strict. They were doing, everything to the best of their knowledge at that point. But when we refer to it as the wackadoo come in, discussing putting your bare feet in the ground, you're doing what? And started talking about it a little bit more. They adopted it just for a few minutes, first thing in the morning, and they were able to do their activities for longer with a reduction of inflammation and pain. They did not have the arm pain, the hand pain, etc. And they were sleeping better, and they were sleeping in one spot. They weren't moving and thrashing around in their sleep. So the quality of sleep improved, and it really does take the focus. I always refer to it as my pillars. I have different pillars of health. They all support my health. And if one is kind of lacking, it doesn't mean that my health is, going to deteriorate and just crash and plummet. But yet it takes them all to hold it up level. And it is. I mean, it's one of those things that it does take focus. But it doesn't have to be complicated either.
And that's the hardest part. It's too simple. It's too easy to go outside, put your feet in the grass, look at the sun. Well, not directly at the sun, please don't do that. But it's too
Eastern,
easy.
Western direction.
Yes, exactly. But we think there's no way that can make a difference, because it's not a macro, it's not a supplement, it's not an exercise. So I love how basic it truly can be. And the pillars of health. Oh, my husband's going to be upset because he's been working on the pillars of health. We have like a whole workbook that we're working on. but it's the same thing. It's exactly the same concept, that there's all these pillars that have to hold you up, and you have to work on all of them. And I think so many of us have gone all cattywampus because we're only working on the macros. We're not dealing with things that have happened in our past, our traumas. We're not healing from other things that could be affecting that. And grounding is a great way to release a lot of that energy. And the sunlight, so many things, I even forget. I am 100% guilty of it, that I got busy and I got out of my routine, and I have not grounded or gone out to watch the sunrise for a month and a half.
Wow.
And man, do I feel it. I'm not sleeping well again. My inflammation is back. I just don't feel as well. So this is my wake up call right now, that no matter what, it is non-negotiable. I will get up in the morning. I will get my butt outside, especially because winter is coming, and winter in Wisconsin is something. So sometimes I won't see the sun for months. So I definitely need to take advantage of it now while I can.
But on that note, you also can incorporate nature's free cold exposure.
You gotta do that. Oh,
Because
everyone.
that's how I changed my mindset. I used to hate cold. I was always someone that, throw more wood in the fire and I'll sit by it and I'll stay warm because I'm not going outside. It's snowing, it's blowing, it's cold. But when I ended up and changed that thought process of, this is my free ice bath, this is my free cold exposure. So yes, there's a difference. I get that. But between an ice bath and submerging yourself in ice water and just being exposed to cold temps, I get that. But when I looked at it as my nature's free cold thermogenesis, it was like, this is a benefit, going back to, is it medicinal, therapeutic for me? It's therapeutic to get outside, obviously be smart about it. Don't go out and get, frostbite. But I honestly, like I said before, I'm the wackadoo. I still go outside barefoot, even when there's snow on the ground. I'm not out there near as long, but gray skies, overcast, the sunlight still comes through. So getting out there, keeping consistent, that's the biggest thing. Is people will do it for, a day, people will do it for 3 days, and they're like, this doesn't work. You got to be consistent and you got to keep it in there, whether it's 2 minutes or whether you have 15 to 30 minutes. Just be consistent and get it in, because the grounding, you gather the electrons, you get, the benefits of the inflammation reduction amongst many others, but you're also getting that sunlight, and the sunlight helps, to signal our circadian rhythm for hormones to, start banking that melatonin for the sleep, to end up and help with serotonin and dopamine. So if you can end up and be consistent going into winter, you'll have a lot better winter and a lot better mood and mentality over the winter. And we've seen a reduction of SAD, seasonal affect disorder, with being consistent with it over the summer.
Yeah, I have to. Oh, I hate cold, which is funny. I love winter. Like, I love winter, but I love winter for the sweaters and the big poofy jackets and the boots and the fireplace. So my husband was saying the same thing. He was like, it's literally right outside. Just walk out the door. And so last year I did a short where I did exactly that. And I think I did it for 3 days. And then I think it was a blizzard or something. And so I didn't end up going out, and I never picked it back up again. I have been challenged. I have been personally challenged by Becky to actually be consistent with my grounding. I'm going to do it. I need to do it because winters are long and hard in Wisconsin, and I want to find the good in every situation. I don't ever want to see something as a negative. So I love the way that you're like, free ice bath. I mean, I do have a creek I don't think I will ever be brave enough to go in the creek in the winter. I'm just being real. But you can come and visit me, and then you can show people how
Jump in
I
your
was.
creek.
Yeah, you can come jump in my creek, which is like this deep. I love every bit of that, to see where you've come from. And now you seem to have so much knowledge of just these little bits of information that just kind of flow out of you. That is so amazing. I am really excited for winter to come now. But first, I got to get consistent in the fall. So that is my goal. I'm going to do that consistency in the fall. So just a couple of other quick questions. For anyone who's wondering, who doesn't know you and your story, what does the rest of your family eat? Are you alone in this, or are some of them on this journey with you?
Pretty much alone, although my family is very meat based. Like I said, we get a whole beef and a whole pig processed every year, amongst, other meat items in the freezer. But I'm pretty much alone. They really think I'm kind of crazy since I end up and do, high fat. They're like, "You're eating what? You're doing what with that fat?" Because I'll whip the fat, make my whipped tallow sticks. I'll end up, like you said, with your coffee. I don't do coffee every day, but when I end up and I do the fatty coffee, or I'm adding butter to, ground beef, and they're like, "You're doing what?" So what I do is, if I'm making, a meal, I'll brown up the beef. I take my beef out, try and scoop, some of the rendered fat with it. I add the butter to it. They're the crazies, in my opinion, because they want theirs drained and, strain all the fat off. But to each their own, the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. My kids are meat based, although they're typical teenagers. They'll end up and go to the store and get, typical teenage foods. But the one thing with my son is he has started to do a little bit of fasting. Haven't pushed it. He's 17, but there's days where he's like, "Mom, I'm not hungry. So do I have to eat?" Nope, you don't, son. You don't have to end up and eat an evening meal. I'm not, you sit down to a meal, you clean your plate. Nope. If you're not hungry, that's fine. He's a wrestler, and I mean, he's 6'2" and probably, well, last year he ended up and wrestled 150. So he's, very muscular. But my kids are not overweight, neither one of them. The two that I have at home, I have two that are out on their own. Well, one's in college, but the other one's on his own. And my kids are not overweight, but they're very active too. So like I said, my son plays football, my daughter plays volleyball. They're in sports practice every day. They're, active kids. So they can get away with having a little bit more of the carbs because they're using, for athletics. But no, they're definitely not carnivore or consuming the fat that I'm consuming.
I tell my kids that all the time. I'm like, yeah, you're not nearly as broken as I got, so you can get away with it. That's fine. Yeah, mine are low carb. They were keto for a while, and one of them really was pretty carnivore for a while. But it's so expensive. When you've got this many people, it's really hard to continue to pay for that. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, they're not getting the same damage that I was. They're eating carbs, but I only allow the whole food carbs. So if I allow them to have rice, or I allow them to have, like, we avoid the pasta as much as possible because of the glyphosate, but the fruit, we have a lot of fruit on our property. So I will allow them to have those. And we've kind of found the balance of how many carbs they can have without losing their ever loving minds, because that too is fairly important to me.
Yeah.
And they're happy, I'm happy. And so it's been a really nice blending of everything, but it certainly did take us a little while. So, man, what I wouldn't give to go back to that time where I could still eat some of this stuff. And if I could just eat the whole foods, oh, how different would it be? But then we wouldn't have our journeys to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has been a learning curve, let me tell you. But all I can do is lead by example and teach them. And it is already, I mean, like I said, starting to show through on my 2 kids that are still at home and my daughter that's in college. Well, all 4. Let me rephrase that. All 4, because my oldest son ended up and called me the other day and he's like, "Hey, if you end up and really like biltong," so he raided our fridge. We were gone, and I have like one drawer in my fridge, it's like a crisper drawer that is my drawer. And we were gone. He raided the fridge, and I get this call, and he's like, "Hey, if you really like biltong, you need to check out this company." So they end up and they have, and he went on, and I'm like, this is coming from my soon to be 24-year-old. And I'm like, they listen. My daughter that's in college, they always talk about the freshman 15. She works for a hospital. She called me and she's like, "Hey, Mom, I joined the gym at the hospital and I'm really going to end up and start eating better. And if I end up and I put this," she was calling me about a chuck roast. She's like, "If I put this chuck roast in the crock pot, how long do I have to let it cook?" And so she's not doing, fast food all the time. She is making more meals at the dorm. And like I said, the 2 at home, I mean, my son, he eats a lot of like jerky, and they do eat yogurt. They're, like you said, low carb keto, but if they're at school, they do get influenced by other kids and will have the occasional sugar. But like I said, they're active, they're able to end up and burn through that. So I don't stress it too much.
I love that. That is the perfect way to look at it. Just be the cool, relaxed mom. You just exude that cool, relaxed mom. So you got that down. Alrighty. Well, I think that is a fantastic episode for everyone who was able to catch this one. Any words of wisdom that you want to leave with everyone, and then let everyone know where they can find you as well?
So my only words of wisdom is, don't give up hope. There is a way out there, and there is an approach that will end up in work. It is individualized. So if one way isn't working, don't fear the other. End up and just take that leap of faith. Even if your faith is as small as a little mustard seed, take that leap of faith and take the baby steps. I mean, the baby steps lead to great success, and it's about progress, not necessarily perfection. You don't have to be perfect day in, day out. Just end up and continue that progress and make it a consistent habit. And the more you can end up, doing it in the baby steps, the more it will end up and turn into a wonderful journey. As far as finding me, I am most active on social media on Instagram. Like you said, I am Becky Niles is what my Instagram handle is. Otherwise, I mean, I'm in the Revero community as a coach. I host several meetings there. I am in Keto Academy with Ben Azadi, so I end up and help his members on the keto front. And then I also end up and have my own community, which is FABintuition on locals.com.
Awesome. And I will have all of those linked down below for anyone who wants to locate you. So, Becky, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me today. And I make a promise right here and now that I am going to be consistent with going outside and grounding. You're going to have to probably check in with me and be like, are you doing it? Because
I'll tag you in my morning grounding video for accountability.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Symptoms. If I get anything, I can immediately correspond it to food.
That is brilliant. I love, and that's so part of your data nerdness.
It is.